let you know that we are recording this session today. That's with the permission of Daphne and Sharon. My name is Daryl Cooperstock, and I'm your tech host today. And Shoshana Zaks will be our host for the program. Can everybody hear me okay?
I think a few people still aren't muted.
Well, I'll be muting people in a second. Okay. So that's fine. Because my two hands are busy now, and I will get to those people. All right. As long as everybody can hear me pretty well. Tonight's session, as I said, will be recorded, and it will be posted on the Becky website at some point in the next several days. When I finish this introduction, I will post that link in the chat so that later on, if you take that and copy it, you can find the recording if you want to share that with somebody. Daphne is going to receive a copy of the recording, so if you don't manage to get it through the link, you can contact her directly if you're family and friends from other places. Daphne will be sharing her screen tonight, so get a good look at everybody now, because we're going to be looking at the material she's going to be sharing. Our presenters have requested that our question and answer session be held at the end of their presentation, which doesn't mean you should hold your questions and comments till then, because you'll forget them by the time the presentation is over. So if something occurs to you, make a note of it for yourself, and please use the chat function in Zoom, and just send me personally, under my name, Daryl Cooperstock, the word question or the word comment. But don't type your whole comment and your question unless it's something you are just sharing by written word with everybody and don't want to do that out loud. In that way, I will take down names that I get in order, and you don't have to waste time typing your question and not paying attention to the presentation as it's proceeding while you're thinking out your question. I really appreciate that. As I said before, everyone is going to remain muted during the presentation except for the presenters. Once our question and answer period starts, I'll call on people in order, ask you to unmute, and then once you've asked your question or finished with a discussion, mute again. I will be going through and monitoring for any background noise. So if you haven't muted yourself, I may mute you. Does anybody have any questions about our format or how to manage the Zoom technology? You all seem to be pretty facile with it. I'll continue to add people from the waiting list and check against my list that I have here. I hope you enjoy the presentation, and now I'll turn it over to Shoshana Zaks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shoshana, and I'm really excited that this day has come because I was just thinking about it. I first learned about the book back last spring when parts of it, little pieces of it, photos were appearing in my Instagram feed from someone I follow who is a mutual friend of Daphne's. But I know Daphne as well, so I was very curious. Daphne and our kids went to school together, elementary school together. And I'm also particularly curious about this project because what I consider my second mother, which is my mother's best friend growing up and into adulthood, is a woman named Hester Kool, who was hidden during the war in Holland. And as I grew up, I heard pieces of her story that I suppose were kind of age appropriate for the various phases I was in. She also is one of, not surprisingly, none of you will be surprised to hear this, she doesn't really like to talk about it very much. So her story was, came out in bits and pieces. And she's one of my favorite people on the entire planet. And so this book and this story of your family just resonated so much with me that I was super excited when I saw it and saw how beautifully you guys had put it together. and really, I'm so appreciative that you've brought these stories to light. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. Let's start with Sharon, who I love your bio, Sharon, because I'm a nurse midwife, but I particularly love the fact that Sharon works as an embryologist in an IVF unit. She makes babies every day. What a great job. I know it's not easy. I'm not trying to say it's easy and always happy, but it's a beautiful thing. Before you worked as a neurosurgical nurse and as a genetic researcher, and you served as a commander of the electronic intelligence course in the IDF Intelligence Corps. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And Daphne designs books on art and history for major museums. Her involvement in publications that use art and literature to educate began with her thesis at Yale on Direction magazine, in which artists and writers speak out against fascism. Geismar developed a photography and writing program for teenage mothers, and she teaches design at a number of universities, lives here in New Haven. So thank you both for being here, and tell us your story.
Thank you, Shoshana, for inviting us, for that really lovely introduction, and for organizing the event. And thank you everyone else for being here with us this morning. As Shoshana mentioned, I'm speaking to you from New Haven, and I'm delighted that my cousin Sharon Strauss is joining us today.
So hello again from Israel. I'm speaking to you from a small town in northern Israel, near Nazareth.
Now I'm going to switch to screen share. Before we get started. Can everybody see that? Great. Okay. Oh, 1 second. Just have to organize my screen. Okay. So today, Sharon and I are going to tell you about a 14-year journey during which we discovered the life stories of our mothers, their sister, and parents, the D'Souza family. They were a Jewish family living fulfilling lives until they were slowly restricted from society during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. Eventually, the D'Souza family went into hiding. The 3 girls were separated from their parents and from one another for 3 years because splitting up increased their chance of survival. Our book weaves together their breathtaking and intimate stories, which were unknown to us until a surprising phone call arrived.
In early 2006, my mother received a phone call from a relative. She said, "You are a deserter, right?" Her relative had just seen an ad in a newspaper from the Dutch immigrant in Israel, and they were looking for descendants of the D'Souza family, of Chaim and Fifi D'Souza. It was placed by the Breplane Church in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. The congregation was looking for descendants of 2 Jewish families that were hidden in the attic of the church during the Nazi occupation. They wanted to invite them to the 75th anniversary celebration. This was the first time we heard that our grandparents were hidden in the attic of the church. 11 of our family members went to the Netherlands to attend the ceremony in the church.
On the left, you see the sanctuary and organ pipes, and on the right is the attic where our grandparents, Chaim and Fifi, were hidden behind and above the organ pipes. When I stood in this attic in 2006, I wondered what our grandparents whispered during the long months that they were there. We know that it was frigid in winter and suffocating in summer. And I wondered how they worried for their 11, 10, and 9-year-old daughters. After hiding in the attic, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, no, go ahead.
Okay. After hiding in the attic for almost 2 years, and shortly before liberation, there was a Nazi raid on the church. Our grandfather Chaim wrote about the terrifying event, and he included this drawing of their hiding place with that writing. And you can see in this drawing the arched area of the organ pipes. And then in the organ loft behind that was the ladder up to the trap door, and their hiding place was in this area right here.
I will read an excerpt from my grandfather's Chaim diary on the raid. I hear someone walking through the church. There is a sound of multiple footsteps. Carefully, I hold the edge of the opaque green curtain against the wall and use my finger to create a small crack, only to grow rigid with fear at the very moment. On the podium below me, between the pews of the elders and deacons, at a distance of perhaps 4 meters, there are 2 green police walking around searching everything. And then comes the stage of paralysis, the sense that all is lost.
61 years later, I had a moment alone in the organ loft. Remembering my grandfather's writing, I pulled back the same curtain to look into the nave, just as my grandfather had when he saw the Nazi police searching between the pews.
There is still a small chance. Now the super heavy ladder still has to be raised. One slip and that's the end. For the Germans are already below me in the foyer, from which we are separated by thin slats of wood. They're coming up the stone staircase to the little storage space. I close the trapdoor and cover the cracks with a cloth, and a German hand is already at the door of the storage space. I remain standing on the trapdoor, completely motionless.
So this is the area inside at the top of the trap door where Chaim was standing. And just before the raid, Chaim had placed their lunch dishes on the brick wall that you see there. After what seemed like an eternity, the sexton's wife knocked on the trap door to tell Chaim that the Nazis had left. And when they turned on a light, they saw a spoon teetering on the edge of that brick wall. Had it fallen when the Nazi police were standing just below, my grandparents and the rescuers would have all been murdered.
Reverend Gerrit Brillingberg-Worth and his wife Gerda saved the life of our grandparents. At the ceremony in 2006, we met their grandchildren. They invited us to their home in Amsterdam, and we had a lovely and emotional dinner. They started to ask our mothers questions, and our mothers started to tell stories that we never heard before. It was that night we decided we should start to collect all those stories, and it was that night that the idea of a book came up for the first time. When we returned to the United States and to Israel, we both asked our mothers to please tell us more about their experience during the war.
My mother led me to an antique desk and opened the bottom drawer. It was filled with letters, diaries, and documents about our family members' experiences during the Holocaust. Sharon, do you remember after my mother opened the drawer, I called you right away to tell you the news that she had this drawer full of material?
Yes, I do. And I told you that my mother had a Holocaust drawer too. And in her, or in the both drawers, we found documents from our grandparents, Chaim and Fifi, from their daughters, Miriam, Judith, and Hadassah, from the future husband, our father, and from Erwin, Daphne's parental grandfathers, all of them from the Netherlands. They became the 8 narrators of our book. Daphne, at one point, we even thought, you remember, to call the book The Holocaust Drawers?
Yes, I love that title.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I still think it might be the best title for the book.
Yeah, I don't know, but maybe.
So the 8 narrators that Sharon just mentioned that make up Invisible Years are from 3 family groups. This is the D'Souza family. The adults in this photograph are our grandparents, Chaim and Fifi. Before they had children, Fifi was a nurse and director of a children's hospital. Her friends were artists and writers, and she often participated in demonstrations against for feminist causes. Chaim was a pharmacist who was interested in philosophy. He was required to work as a military pharmacist in the Dutch East Indies in return for the military financing his education. So the three girls were born in the Dutch East Indies, where this photo was taken. They returned to Rotterdam in 1936 when where the family shared happy and fulfilling lives.
This is a photograph of the three deserted girls shortly before the German occupation. From the left is Hadassah, Miriam, Daphne's mother, and Judith, my mother.
From the Geismar family, one narrator is David. He's on the left. He is my father. David and his parents emigrated from Germany to the Netherlands. David was a mischievous boy who loved to play with his friends in Amsterdam. The other narrator in the Geismar family is Erwin. Erwin is David's father, my grandfather. And Erwin had a factory where he designed and manufactured leather accessories. In 1940, he volunteered as a social worker for the Committee for Jewish Refugees. We learned a lot about the social and political situation from Erwin's memoir. David's mother, Greta, my grandmother on the left, is not a narrator because she didn't leave any writings. And this really makes me think about the importance of documentation and evidence and leaving a story.
In the Cohen family, the only narrator is Nathan, my father, but we learn about his two sisters and about his parents from his account. My father grew up in Apeldoorn, surrounded by nature in the center of the Netherlands. His father was a general practitioner. In 1939, all three families welcomed German Jewish refugees to their home. In the case of the De Zoete and the Cohen family, they fostered a girl in the age of their children.
We'd like to show you just a few of the things we found in the drawers. In my mother's, Miriam's drawer, I found what I call a miracle. It's a document written in German, which I don't speak, but fortunately my husband, Rob, does. After reading the first page, Rob turned to me and said, "This is a memoir that your paternal grandfather, Erwin, wrote while he was in hiding." I knew almost nothing about Erwin. On the first page, Erwin writes, "Why do I begin just today to write on the day that has brought me the most personal worries of the last 3.5 years? Most likely because I am alone with my thoughts and worries, because I no longer have my daily occupation, because my domestic surroundings are dissolved, because the chance to commit my entire being to help my family and myself has been taken from me. Perhaps too, the helplessness in which I find myself, condemned to sitting still, the unaccustomed quiet." Towards the end of his 49-page memoir, Erwin writes, "In the end, I hope that my lines will be read by people who will see how we struggled under terrible circumstances, and that the reader will want to take up this struggle that we have fought and experienced from the front lines for the construction of a worthwhile, humane society." Erwin began writing this memoir on the 21st of July, 1943, in the Amsterdam apartment where he was hidden 2 days after he had sent his 13-year-old son, David, my father, to a safer address. 6 weeks later, Erwin was captured by the Germans and on November 19th, 1943, murdered in Auschwitz. Somehow, we don't know how, his memoir was returned to the family. Neither my mother nor my father knew it lay hidden in an envelope with my grandmother's papers. My father, David, died 3 years before we found it. For me, bringing my grandfather and father's voices back together is the joy and sorrow of this book.
In my mother, Judith drawer, we found her yellow Star of David. People ask me how I felt when I found it. I was numb. Actually, I'm very good in repressing my feelings. My mother Judith was almost 10 years old when she went into hiding. She wrote about the day she had to leave her parents and sisters. After arrangements were made, our parents told my sister and me, go to Uncle Kiss, but before you reach his house, make a stop and go under one of the bridges on the way and take off your jacket with the star and leave it there. Once you reach his house, he will take care of everything. Under the bridge, I took off my jacket and put it in a bag I had with me. At that moment, I didn't realize the danger of keeping the star. I kept it a secret, realizing I have disobeyed my father and put it in a book I love to read.
This letter by our grandfather Chaim was in Miriam's drawer. It's addressed to his 3 daughters, and it's written 5 years after the end of the war. When we found it, we thought it would be the focus of the book and knew that it was the first thing we had to have translated. It's written in Dutch. After it was translated, we then knew it was a guide of sorts to make sense of the world after the Holocaust. Chaim draws from the Bible, Buddhist texts, Jewish philosophers, scientists, and writers. It's really, really interesting, but we were disappointed that the letter didn't tell us anything about their experiences under occupation. So we only ended up using bits of it rather than having it be the core of the book. We continued to find things for about another decade. Many of our findings led to more questions. So there was a lot that we ended up searching for, and other information seemed to find us. In the piles that I brought home to my house from the Holocaust drawer, I found a typed translation of this note. The note was written by my mother, Miriam, to her parents when she was a child in hiding. The English translation was also done by Miriam as an adult after the invention of email. If there was a translation, I thought there has to be an original. So I went back to my mother's house to search the Holocaust drawer. The drawer was it was huge and dense, and there was so much in there, and much of it I couldn't read because it was in Dutch or German. So I was often going back and sifting through. And when I didn't find the note there, my mother revealed that there were more papers in her bedroom that I hadn't known about. This was a few years later. And indeed, there were 2 tall piles on her dresser where I found this beautiful fragment. In her note, Miriam reassures her parents that she is okay. It's really very sweet the way she does this, and she's describing her cozy bedroom. But we know from Miriam's account that that quickly changed.
Miriam wrote about the sleeping arrangement in her account. When the Germans started to unexpectedly search home for hidden weapons, hidden Jews, and hidden pilots from downed airplane, a friend of the family came to make a hiding place under the kitchen floor. He made a trapdoor and then put linoleum over it. You could crawl in it. 2 mattresses were put on the dirt floor. Every night at 7 for the remaining years of the war, more than 2 years, we said good night, and the 4 of us went down into our little night prison. We were not allowed to talk out loud when we were in there. You never knew who was above your head in the kitchen.
And I just want to add that when Miriam says the 4 of us, she's referring to herself and 3 other Jewish children who were hidden in the same home. Miriam didn't know these other children until they were in hiding together. When I discovered the bedroom piles, I also found 4 loose pages from our grandmother Fifi's diary, written on the infamous date of April 23rd, 1943. I knew from a letter my grandfather had written that this was, in his words, the day every Jew had to disappear.
Both Chaim and Fifi wrote about the desperate need for hiding place on that date. This is a detail from Chaim accounts written in English to Yad Vashem. On that date, after changing 7 hiding places, Chaim and Fifi didn't have a place to stay for the night. Reverend Brillenburg met them at a friend's house and arranged a place for them for a short while. And then he came back again and he said that he spoke to his sexton, Mr. DeMars, and he asked him to prepare a hiding place in the attic of the church. Can you imagine that Mr. DeMars said to him, well, I'm hiding another Jewish family in the attic for a year now. Yes, so they decided to prepare another hiding place on the other side above the organ. They thought it will be for 10, 14 days, and they stayed there for 2 years.
The last year and a half in hiding was the most difficult for the Jesuita girls. It was too dangerous for resistance workers to deliver letters between hiding places, so the girls didn't know if their sisters and parents were alive. Miriam, in this engraving detail, was sleeping under floorboards, as we just read. Miriam and Hadassah were suffering from lack of food, and Miriam was sent out to beg for tulip bulbs and sugar beets from farmers. The new wife of the man who was hiding Hadassah on the left did not know Hadassah was Jewish and sent Hadassah to stand in line for food at the Gestapo headquarters because Nazi sympathizers received extra ration cards. Judith, on the right, had to leave the home where she was hiding with 3 older women because of increased raids in the neighborhood. Her new hiding parents had 8 children of their own. Still, there was enough food because they lived on a farm. But in this house, Judith had a different horror to endure. When Judith realized the book would be published, she made the difficult decision to share her complete story. She had written about it with plans to leave it for Sharon and her two sisters to read after her death. You're looking at the back of a photograph of the couple who hid Judith receiving recognition for hiding her. At the bottom right, you can read the crimes of the father and his 2 sons. This is an excerpt from Judith's letter. The last family I was hiding with was where it happened. The father and 2 of his sons, 16 and 17-year-old, abused me. There was nothing I could do and nobody I could go to. I never told my parents. Years after, Poppy submitted their names to the righteous list in Yad Vashem, and sometime later, they sent us a letter with pictures of the ceremony in the Israeli consulate, where they got a medal and a certificate and trees planted in their name for saving a Jewish life. In 2016, Judith, her daughters, and I requested that this person be removed from the righteous at Yad Vashem. He was the opposite of moral and virtuous. I met with the director of the Department of the Righteous and gave her Judith's written account. They took it really seriously. The Yad Vashem board and a judge reviewed the case, and his name was removed.
After Daphne came to Israel, we went together to the Netherlands with Daphne's husband, Rob, and with my eldest son, Jonathan. We went to pick up some more photographs. We went to archives. We visited the helper's family, and we went to see the hiding places while reading the accounts near them. And we went to a small town of Ghent. Ghent is on the German border, just north of the Vol River. And Ghent is the area where Operation Market Garden took place in September 1944.
And just for those who, just a refresher on Operation Market Garden, it was the Allies' risky plan to close in on the Germans. Paratroopers were to secure key bridges in the occupied Netherlands with ground troops pushing north to create a pathway into Germany. The mission succeeded in liberating a portion of the southern Netherlands, but the Allies didn't make it north of the Waal and Rhine rivers. So much of the Netherlands remained under German occupation.
And Ghent is where my father Nathan was hidden, together with his parents and his two sisters.
Nathan and his family were hidden by this policeman, Theo Van Dalen, and his wife, Betsy. During the occupation, Theo enacted detailed plots to sabotage the German war effort. In the aftermath of Market Garden, Theo and Betsy's house was bombed. Miraculously, all survived, but Natan and his family had to quickly find a new hiding place. Natan's entire account reads like an adventure story. Here's a little bit. The Germans shot down bombers and fighters over Holland. Theo must have had good contacts with the Dutch underground because that winter he had more guests, Canadian, English, and American pilots on their way back to England. I practiced my English and my chess on the poor downed aircrew members. We also kept war maps, which we prepared ourselves, first tracing them from the World Atlas and then enlarging them by scaling. We had 2 different lines of pins for Russia, sometimes hundreds of kilometers apart. One where the Germans said the front was, and one where the BBC said the front was.
My grandfather, Isaac Cohen, Yitzhak Cohen, and Theo Van Dalen received this certificate signed by Eisenhower, who was the commander of the Allied forces in Europe at the time. The certificate is for gallant service in assisting the escape of Allied soldiers from the enemy. Daphne, do you remember we discussed this a lot? We said, why didn't they tell us about their story, about their experiences? And we said it was too hard for them. We said they wanted us to have a normal childhood, maybe. We said maybe they wanted to move on, but I never understood why hide this amazing certificate and brave story. It should be a source of pride, I think.
I think so too. I think we've learned how humble, wonderfully humble our relatives were, as well as not wanting to talk about the story because of how difficult it was. So eventually we had a treasure trove of stories from our extended family to turn into a book, just a little bit of which we've shared with you here. As Shoshana mentioned, my thesis at Yale was on Direction magazine, which was published from 1937 to 1945. It was with this publication that I really think I first understood the power of words and images. In Direction, artists and writers spoke out against fascism and social injustice. During the work on my thesis, I discovered the unpublished diary of the editor, Marguerite Jader Harris, and I interviewed the great designer Paul Rand about his provocative covers. At the time, I didn't realize how connected my thesis was to my family history. With our family archive before me, I was able to draw on 20 years of experience planning, designing, and producing books on art and history for museums. When I was working on Invisible Years, I formed an advisory group. I knew that my own project would always be on the back burner as I was meeting my clients' deadlines. So the advisory group helped me stick to deadlines. We met every 2 or 3 months, and they offered advice and assistance in myriad ways. And we met after work and always had excellent snacks and dinners while we talked about the development of Invisible Years.
These are just a few things from our archive. Everything was transcribed, translated, and scanned. So we created both a digital archive and a physical archive.
Once everything was finally typed and in English, I printed everything out and read through all the accounts. At that moment, I realized that no one person had the complete story, but their collective accounts made it whole. So what I did was I cut up everyone's accounts, literally, and created content groupings based on what was there. I then sequenced those groupings and created a single narrative. When I first read The Interwoven Voices, it was the most emotional moment for me in making the book. With multiple perspectives, it was really nuanced and it wasn't at all oversimplified. And that's when I really understood the horror of what happened, also how it happened and what it was like for my family members. And at that moment of that reading, I put my head on the table to weep. As I pieced the narrative, I became really curious about the people, institutions, and events mentioned by the narrators. So I researched and read about them and then drafted little history briefs. After that, I hired a writer, Jenny Maggi, who took my drafts and created these really wonderful, short, engaging entries for these history briefs. And finally, Robert Jan van Pelt, a renowned Holocaust historian who wrote the foreword for Invisible Years, wonderfully and kindly fact-checked our history briefs and added to them. He had this whole universe of information in his brain. And we realized that there really isn't a lot of clear factual information on the history of the Holocaust in the Netherlands that's in English. We had these really beautiful photographs and artifacts and letters and documents from the drawers. And I wanted the reader to experience them much in the same way that I did. So I hired a photographer who shoots art for museums to shoot really high resolution photographs with a real light shadow underneath them, as opposed to a Photoshop shadow. It was really important to me that both the content and the visuals, that nothing is altered or fake, that everything is as real as it possibly can be. And it also allowed many of the photos, which are really tiny context size and originals, to be used very large in the book.
So on December 2019, just before the whole world sky was shut down, as we all know, we met in Florence, Italy, for the printing of the book. It was a very exciting moment. After 14 years, we finally had a book.
So the book is slightly oversized. Here's a three-dimensional version. It's 248 pages and 8¼ by 11¾ inches. The end leaves are the lining that was at the bottom of my mother's Holocaust drawer. On the table of contents, I just want to point out the 6 main chapters, which is before, where you get a sense of their sort of rather dull but lovely lives before the war. And then Trapped is the Nazi occupation. Forbidden is when all of the restrictions were placed against the Jews, and the decrees and restrictions are interspersed with the narrator's experiences based on those restrictions. Separated is when they're making plans to go into hiding, and their first experiences in hiding, which really for everybody were just temporary hiding places at first. And then Invisible is when they go into hiding long-term for 2 or 3 years. And after is Liberation, and a little bit of what became of their lives after the war. And Ziggy is, for a story for another time, it's kind of like a bonus track on a CD. It's, he's our uncle. He doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the narrators because he was from Poland. So each chapter opens with an introduction that provides context written by Robert Jan, and a timeline that I put together that juxtaposes what is happening with each of the 8 narrators and kind of gives you a sense of where everyone is at the time, and also what's happening socially and politically at the time. Just to give you a sense for this chapter on separated, the first two entries, the first entry tells that on August 19th, the three D'Souza girls go into hiding. And then the next entry in August and September, their four cousins are murdered in Auschwitz. As we mentioned, each chapter, well, most of the chapters are organized by family grouping because each person and each of the members in the family were experiencing the same thing. So you're getting the stories from their multiple voices. It's all people have said, and it was my hope for the book, that it's really like they're talking to one another and like they're talking to you. And you can see here, this is Miriam, Judith, Hadassah, Miriam, Hadassah, Miriam. So they're having this back and forth, almost like this conversation about their experience. And on other pages in this chapter are also Chaim and Fifi. So this is the before chapter and the D'Souza family. And then you get the other two families. And in the outside margin throughout the book are the call outs for the history briefs. So if you come across something that you're interested in knowing more about the historical context, it gives you the page that you can read about that on.
This map opens the hiding chapter. It shows the hiding places of the 8 narrators. It shows the name of those who helped, the dates and the addresses. The maps flips out, as Daphne is showing you. And so you can see also the hiding places in the east side of the Netherlands. The D'Souza family addresses came from letters my grandfather Chaim wrote to Yad Vashem. Actually, we didn't know about them until we connected Mordechai Paltiel. He was the former director of Yad Vashem Righteous Ammunition Department. And Mr. Paltiel remembered our grandfather. He said he was one of the first one to submit letters requesting recognition for the helpers. And he said that his letters were very detailed. In total, you can see that the map shows 27 documented hiding places for 8 people.
In the chapter titled Invisible, when all the narrators go into hiding, their voices are separate. I tried for weeks and weeks to interweave their voices as their voices had been interwoven in all of the other chapters. And it wasn't working. And I kept trying other different constructions. And I almost gave up on the whole idea of weaving their voices together. And now in hindsight, it seems so obvious, but of course their voices couldn't be together in hiding because their hiding experiences are completely different from one another and they're in isolation, they're not with one another. So it made no sense to have them telling, they couldn't tell the same stories. And I kind of can't believe it took me so long to figure that out because I always tell my students and my clients that good design and organization should grow out of the content. And here I was trying to force this content into a construction that it didn't fit into. So when you get to the invisible chapter, all of the narrators have a subsection where their voices are heard individually. And then upon liberation, their voices are interwoven again.
This is my mother's Judith teddy bear that she had with her the entire time she was in hiding. She gave it to me. Usually he sits on my bookshelf. Last year, he traveled to the United States to be photographed for the book. He's a celebrity now. I think he voted in your last election. Yeah. I miss him a lot. One day he will come back to Israel. But I'm mainly so glad that he was with her all those years in hiding. My mother is the only one from the 8 narrators that is alive today, and she lives happily next door to us. Of the 8 narrators, 7 survived. When the war was over and they came out of hiding, they found out that 61 close family members were murdered. Mothers and fathers, grandfathers and grandmothers, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews. the list remembers them. It contains the names, the relationship, the age, and date and place of murdered. Most of them were murdered in Sobibor and in Auschwitz.
We're going to end our presentation with these words that our grandfather wrote to his 3 daughters. This is from the first page of that 70-page letter shown earlier, in which Chaim hopes to answer questions about life in the aftermath of the mass murders and crimes committed during the Holocaust. When the war was over and we were free once again, days of great happiness arrived. It was as if life itself had been put back into our hands, for our very life had been stripped from us, which is to say, from European Jewry. And it wasn't because we deserved it that death, passing by us so closely, had spared us. Gladness and gratitude overwhelmed me. Gratitude to all of those who had supported us during the war years, and an emotion of thankfulness that, for now, I will call divine. But this feeling was almost immediately stifled, remembering just one of the millions of cases where the children had not returned. Surely countless ones among them must have been 1,000 times more deserving than we. And these are the 3 girls that he was writing to. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful. We do have a couple of comments and questions that have come in so far. Perhaps more will come in as we discuss. Our first comment is from Julie Cohen. Thanks, Julie. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. And I just wanted to say it is such a beautiful book and beautifully designed that I wasn't expecting that at all. And I mean, honestly, when I started from the beginning, and it was quite confusing because there are so many characters. And then once you start reading the real part of it, where it's the different voices together, and they just weave together so beautifully. I'm just so impressed. So, you know, it's a little bit like Images in the Afterlife, where you have people from different generations who couldn't actually be together, but they're all together. And here you have the different, you know, families who haven't even merged as families yet, but their stories go together, and it's really a wonderful work. And when I got it from the Becky gift shop, there were other copies available. So I just think it's definitely something worth getting and sharing with friends.
Thank you so much for that, Julie. It's really nice to hear from people who have read it. It's a difficult book to explain, so it's nice to hear from others.
And one more shout out, because I'm looking at Joanne Rudolph on that screen. And I saw a few of the stories are from the Fortunoff Holocaust testimonies.
They are. I feel really fortunate that both of my parents were interviewed. And I think, Joanne, you met my parents during that process, or at least communicated with them. And those testimonies were invaluable in documenting their accounts.
We have a lot of questions coming in. So, but our next, the next person I believe is Betsy, who had a comment, and then we'll get to some of the rest of it. Betsy, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Barry, excuse me. I thank you for writing this. It's important work, powerful, a great layout and flow in the chapter sections, just amazing with the authenticity and the outstanding way that the power of those drawers come alive. They're not invisible anymore, that's for sure. Their content speak to us so incredibly, eternally, forever. I think others will, those words are immortal, and you made a way to make them infinitely reach numerous. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do hope, I mean, it feels so important that we continue to share the stories, and we really hope that what's wonderful about this book is these stories can continue to be shared in the voices of those who experienced it, but then as I don't know what the word is, Sharon, but we're just sort of vessels to pass it on, and we hope that that somehow we're able to really reach a wide audience, and that these accounts told in this way might be, reach people outside of the Jewish community. It feels so, relatable, I think, to so many, and it helps understand, the importance of seeing each person as human, and that crosses all racial and religious boundaries. And so we're looking forward to seeing how we might get this book out there further.
Thank you. Actually, Shoshana has a question. Shoshana, unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, I was curious. You mentioned that not only had you done the book, and it is a spectacularly beautiful book, and there's so much there, but you also have a physical archive now of the objects. And I'm wondering, where does that live? Or does it, or is it spread out, or is there any plan to have it displayed somewhere?
Most of it at the moment is with me in New Haven, in archival boxes. And, some of it is still with Sharon in Israel. And there's nothing concrete in the works yet, but we've also been thinking about an exhibit. And then eventually we need to find a home, and that's another project.
Thank you, Shoshana. Our next questioner is Sarah Berry. So can you unmute yourself, Sarah? Are you still
here?
Sorry, there you
pressing
go.
on the wrong button.
Okay.
So the last film where you see the three girls climbing up the ladder, where is that and when was that taken?
Do you want to tell about that, Sharon? Or do
No, you tell.
Okay.
Difficult English speaking.
So those films came to us very recently. It was just a maybe I think the book was in production, and we have our mother's cousin Chaya Polak lives in Amsterdam, and one of her siblings found this box of films in the basement of their house, and someone else in the family had them digitized, and then she sent them to us. So that's how they came to us. And looking at the girls, it must be we guess 1939, 1940, right before the war. I don't know exactly where it is that they're climbing those ladders, but of course, there's this relationship. You can't help but think of it wasn't them who were hiding in the church with the ladder that went to the trap door, but there's, but it's not there. And it's just before the occupation.
Well, let me just add, good luck finding the permanent home for your collection.
Yes.
It's very important. Speaking as an archaeologist, I know how hard that is.
Thank you.
And now we'll hear from an archivist. Joanne, do you want to unmute? And you had a question? Joanne Rudolph? You're on mute.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
First of all, I just want to compliment Daphne and Sharon and anyone who worked on this. It is just magnificent. And the beauty of it is that the story is told in the voices of the survivors themselves. Daphne, the first documentary I ever made for the video archive included your dad. It was a documentary about Anne Frank, and there are short clips of him in there. And that's when I first met your parents. And that was in the late 80s. And their testimonies were recorded in 1980, actually, before the project came to Yale. I'm really sorry that, we're all sorry that COVID happened for very, very many reasons, but one of the losses was the book launch that was to be held at the Fortunoff Video Archive. And I was so looking forward to meeting you and also to seeing Robert Jan. I hadn't seen him in a long time, and his wife, Miriam. But I'm just so impressed with the way you have authentically used the voices of these survivors. It's just, and their objects and their documents. It's one of the most magnificent I have ever seen, and moving and authentic. And I compliment you also for making sure that everything is historically accurate, because not every survivor's testimony is, and the mistakes are not intentional. And you couldn't have chosen a better person than Robert Jan to do that. And just kudos to you. I can't say enough good things. And thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Joanne. And I just want to tell Sharon and my family in Israel who are on here that Joanne is the former director of the Yale Fortunoff Video Archives. And Stephen Naran, who's the current director, was on for the last year of my advisory board for the book. And that just means so much coming from you, Joanne, because I've been at a number of lectures where you've been speaker or you've been in the audience. And I have great respect for your belief and understanding in hearing directly from the survivors and in being accurate and not distorting the reality and the truth in any way. And you're in my mind often when I try to stand up for that. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Joanne. And thank you, Joanne, for all your work.
Yes.
If right now I have nobody else who wanted to ask a question, and unless somebody comes forward, I actually have a couple of comments. One is, as I was watching, and as several people who have mentioned who are archaeologists, archivists, librarians, I also was a bookbinder and a librarian. The beauty of the book itself, not even talking about the content because I can't see close up enough and I haven't seen the actual book. It's a beautiful design and a beautiful book. And I actually can't wait to get my hands on it tactily to experience it. So thank you for taking the care that you did. I understand this is something that you do, but thank you for sharing that while still sharing the content, which is so moving. And I was thinking, my husband's family were survivors. They weren't in hiding. There were over 100 people lost. And it just got me thinking, the way in which you so organically gathered different stories from different parts of your family actually has motivated me to reach out to different parts of his family who we are in touch with. We have a video testimony that his parents, they used to speak at a local college. And we have video of that, and we have some tape of some radio interviews with them. But we know that some of their younger relatives who survived also have stories that they shared with their children, and that's been very important. But we've never sat all together to piece together the different stories that came of people who came together again finally after the war, to find out where did they intersect historically, and where did they intersect emotionally, etc. And I found your presentation incredibly moving and inspiring to go and try and see if we can do that while we can. So thank you.
Do it.
Personally, yes. And I think also maybe Shoshana and I will have some conversations about programming that we can do in our own community to try to gather. Some of us may feel that parts of our families didn't have enough archive or don't have people who are alive any longer to have submitted that to the Fortunoff archive. But perhaps we as a community can invite people to share the archive that they have from their families, even if it be a letter, even if it be a short video clip, even if it be photographs, to be able to continue this experience that we had with you and translate it for our own families. And I just wanted to thank you for that. Also, we're living through an unusual time, lahavdil, right now, and perhaps we can take a note on journaling a little bit for our own families, for our children, for our grandchildren who are toddlers at the moment, who won't know what we experience being separated from them, or etc. And I hope that I hope everybody else was as inspired as I. I see that he tuned in quite late. Howard Gralla is on, who is a book designer. And I don't know, Howard, are you on? I'm looking for, I saw him sign in, but I can't find him. He may have had comments to make on the book design as well. So I'm certainly going to go to the gift shop and look for the book because I really want to get my hands on it. And that was what I had to share. Since I've been, talking, we have a couple of other things that came in. And I'd like to call on Cynthia, who had the next comment, and then we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. This was, of course, very moving, and I wasn't sure I was even going to be able to talk as I feel so moved. So you did so much work on structure that one of what comes to mind is if there's a way to document that structure that can be to encourage other groups. So this actually touches on what Daryl just said. I'm also thinking that we are close to some people who come from a non-literate society where stories are told only orally. So obviously there's different challenges in documenting that, but the bigger question is just making a outline of how you came to this. And maybe that has to be somebody else's project to interview you because you got, because you got this done. But has there been any movement in that direction or something?
It's something I think about a lot. And Sharon and my cousin Hadassah, who's also on, and Ronit, who's a Holocaust educator, who's also on, we've been talking about how to use this material for educational purposes. And there's so many different ways we could do it. And of course, one idea is to do workshops to help others, facilitate others in making similar projects. It doesn't, as you said, it can be just a letter, or it doesn't have to be a 248-page book. But I'm really interested in the idea of putting together a curriculum for a workshop to help others do this in various communities. And I have, I've taught and spoken to design classes on the process of making books. And so I'm interested in also putting together a presentation on you saw a little bit of the process of making this book in this, but that could, as you say, that could be a presentation or an outline or a book in itself. So I'm excited to hear that you find those ideas interesting, because that's sort of what interests me in the wake of finishing up the book and moving to the next step.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I think that may be it. Anybody else have any questions they want to raise or comments? Thank you all.
Can I just say one
sure.
last thing?
Please, please go ahead.
You're mentioning the bookshop, that the book is available at the Becky Bookshop, which is great. And I also just want to mention you can get it. I like to use bookshop.org because that's from your local book buyers, but of course there's Amazon. There's also a website for the book. It's invisibleyears.com. And there's some other related material on the website. And the Instagram account that Shoshana mentioned, you can see many more images from the book there. And I guess that's Invisible Years. I should know. But if you just go to the website, which is invisible.years.com, there's links. You can sign up for a newsletter about other talks that might be coming up. I don't send out very many newsletters, so you won't be bombarded. And you can get the Instagram link too. And I just want to thank Sharon for going through this whole journey with me. We became so close through this. I became really close to my aunt Judith, who is the only living narrator who is still with us, and she's here. She's been listening in, and we became really close, and my cousin Hadassah, and I also want to thank Sharon and Hadassah and Jean and Ronit, because we kind of worked as a team to refine this presentation for today. And I want to thank Becky and Shoshana again for putting this together. It was really nice to talk with people from New Haven and this community. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Things I want to say, first of all, you heard that this book was published after the quarantine or the shutdown began. So it really has not gotten the fanfare and the wide publicity, I think, that it deserves. So please buy the book. Give the book to people who you think will like it. Tell people about it. Spread the word. In any other year, there would have been all kinds of doings in New Haven and around the world probably to mark the publication of this book. And because we're all sitting in isolation in our homes, oh good, there's a copy of the book in our community. You know, I really want people to get out and see this. It's a really beautiful, I was telling Daphne, I keep it on my coffee table. I haven't been able to read it straight through, but I pick up and I look at little pieces and I look at pictures, and it takes me on little journeys, and it's not depressing. It's a little heavy. It's a heavy story. We all know the story though. And the best thing is we know that it ends with these people who are alive all your family members who are still here, which to me is one of the remarkable pieces of this story always, which is some people perished, lots of people perished, but then lots of people survived and continue, and we need to just continue amplifying those stories. So thank you so much to both Sharon and to Daphne. Sharon, did you want to say something? I'm sorry, I think I cut you off.
No, it's okay. I wanted to say thank you to everybody and to Daphne mostly, and that's it.
We have another program on Wednesday evening, another important program, I think, because it's Cynthia Rubin's going to be talking to us and the artist Leslie Klein about the art exhibit that's been up at Becky since quarantine began, because that was the last art show that we put up before we closed the building. Beautiful pieces of art, again, probably another very interesting story, an interesting journey that I think people will enjoy going on. That's Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock. I'm sorry, 7 o'clock. No, it's 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock, our usual Becky schmooze time. And then on Saturday night, we're having a Havdalah Hanukkah event starting at 5:30. Light your Hanukkah, sing some songs, and just make Havdalah first and have some fun with people you know. So thank you very much. It's great to see everybody here. It was so nice to see so many faces from Israel. Thank you so much for tuning in. It was really wonderful.
Bye.
Bye all.
Thank you.